welcome to everybody. It is my sheer pleasure and privilege to be doing this. When Nupur sort of sprung this upon me a few days back, and I was like, totally, we have to do this. It's an amazing idea. And thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, Nupur, and especially for putting this forum together. And as Renuka sort of very rightly said this, that this is sort of upon us to make this successful. The entire proposition of why we are doing this becomes a very important question, and I think I would like to take a few minutes to address this. 2020 is a minor year on various counts. First, as a country, we have sustainable development goals to achieve. The gender conversation has never been as important as before. Just to give you context to that, just recently, Goldman Sachs said that it will not do an IPO of any startup if you don't have a diverse director on board. That's a very big statement coming from the world's largest global investment bank. That is one. Second, to talk about the kind of dry powder piling up in the PE/VC industry, about 8 trillion in assets, and only about 7% of that goes to women-backed companies. That's a recent IFC study in that. So what really are we talking about here? As a nation, we have a target to be this 5 trillion economy by 2025. So how do we achieve that if we don't have this half population not really being involved in financial services, which is such an important cog in the wheel of the economy? So these are some of these driving forces which just make the entire conversation about gender so much important. And when I talk about private equity, it has such an important role to play here. First, as your investment firms, and also that you have a multiplier effect on the portfolio companies that you invest in. The entire conversation in private equity really has been about, and I have been to so many conferences, that are we investing in companies which are burning so much cash? Are we investing in companies which have great unit economics? My question to the PE investors, at least here, is that, do you also measure the success of your portfolio companies on metrics beyond cash burn, beyond unit economics, and which basically goes to say that how diverse the board is? Does it have women representation, senior women representation on the board? So why can't we just change the metrics for once? If Goldman Sachs can do it, why can't PE firms have a higher bar on how they rate portfolio companies? I want to begin with you, Sandeep. You represent a large global firm. I would want to understand from you that, how do you think about gender diversity? What are the conversations you are having with your LPs? And when you meet with your portfolio companies and you have board meetings, how many times does this conversation really springs up?
Sure. I'd just like to thank Nupur for putting this initiative together. It's a fantastic initiative, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge success. Just if I think about my own career, I'm a product of a woman in private equity that actually hired me. So the beginnings of my career in private equity start from there, and that itself is a huge thing. So when back in the days when I was still in business school, and Adele, who was a partner at Apex Partners, approached me. She was the first one to take a bet on me. And having started my career under a woman, I understand everything that gender diversity brings to the equation.
So you owe your career to a woman.
Completely. I owe my life, my current wife, and my career, all to a woman. So there's no question about that. I'm fully invested in this, as you can tell.
That's a good resounding statement coming from you.
I just carrying that forward, when I first moved to India with Apex to co-found the India office here, my first investment was also backing 4 women at Apollo Hospitals, which is Dr. Reddy and his 4 sisters. And it was incredible working with them because it's very different a way a woman thinks about a business, builds a business, the risk appetite, how they move around, creating empathy in the organization, building a business. And for me, as one of my first investments in a complex environment like India, that was quite an eye-opener as well. I still remember a conversation I had with Dr. Reddy, where he said, if I had 4 sons, probably this business would be split by now. But because I have 4 daughters, it's still one entity and we are still working as a single one. I moved over to General Atlantic, and my first investment again was backing a woman, where we backed Anita Dongre, who had great aspirations, great vision, wanting to scale up a company. And we believed in what she was doing. And she was, again, a completely self-made entrepreneur working with a sewing machine in her balcony along with her sister, and now has scaled up to a really massive women's fashion apparel retail business. So I'm a firm believer. I've shown that in terms of my actions. To your question on what can firms do, I think we need to move beyond just the financial metrics of how you measure a business. I was at Davos a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of emphasis on gender diversity and how there's enough research that shows that when a company is more gender diverse, its profitability, its market cap, everything is a significant multiple than what it is when it is not. So an absolute firm believer in it, and happy to contribute to the conversation.
Okay, I would sort of like to come to you now, Mukund. I mean, in your organization, sort of how are you thinking about what Sandeep just said? And he said that we have to move beyond financial metrics and how we measure the performance of the organization. So what are you doing in that direction?
Sure, and I'll also echo our thanks to Nupur and the rest of the founding team. So I'll add two things. And we talked about this in the Collegium before. Sometimes there are obvious metrics you can track, but one of the sort of intangibles is, we have not backed many women entrepreneurs in India. I've done a lot of it in the US. I've not done much in India. We have a reasonable number of female executives at the senior levels, but not founders. And that may be the nature of some of the smaller businesses that we back in more rural parts of the country. But I will draw a parallel between the open-mindedness toward diversity and some of the discussions that many of you have had with the DFIs about things like ESG. There's a very, very high correlation in our experience that those founders, those entrepreneurs who actually embrace these metrics, or embrace the direction that you're trying to push them, whether it is on issues like governance or the environment, or it is on diversity, tend to be those same entrepreneurs who are open-minded to better ways of managing businesses, better ways of making decisions, and ultimately that ends up with better results. And so that is the correlation that we see. What we're proud of, and 3 or 4 of those women are in this room, is the number of senior women we have within the firm. Our 2 junior partners, who one day will probably run our firm, are both women. Our head of investor relations is a woman. And so we're very proud of the fact that as a firm, we've cultivated an environment where women have started at the junior levels and thrived. Our job is to make sure that we take the steps to keep and attract more women. And I think that is a self-fulfilling thing, because there are, as we talked about earlier, limited women in financial services, in our system, in private equity. But the more women you have, the easier it is to then attract women entrepreneurs. So the ecosystem creates its own ecosystem. And that's not a 6-month or a 1-year thing, but if you do that over 5, 10, 15 years, I think it'll make a massive difference to the economy.
Interesting. Abhay, I want to sort of come to you, and I think what sort of Mukund and Sandeep both alluded to, that there's also financial incentive to sort of really backing women entrepreneurs. And I want to quote this study here. There was a study by BCG about 350 startups, and it said that startups with a female founder generated about 78 cents of revenue for every $1 of funding, compared to male-founded startups generating with 31 cents. So there is a very clear kind of metric out there. And so I'm not getting the conversation.
How long does it take for the cents to become dollars?
So yeah, that's that. And I think there was also, because you dabble a lot in the early stage investing experience and you have a career past Sequoia and what you're doing right now, and I sort of bring this up for you, is that there was an early stage Innovent Capital report, which basically said that in India, there are startups with founders, like the total composition of women-founded startups is less than 17%. So of course, what Renuka also said, that there is a talent issue. You don't have many startups. the women, they came to the fore and said that while they were interviewed, when they were raising startup funding, they had a very different kind of experience compared to a female founder and a male founder. And I want to talk about that also. When they were quizzing male entrepreneurs, the investors adopted what is called a promotion orientation, where you talk about hopes, achievements, advancements, and ideals. When you were questioning female entrepreneurs, the investors embraced what is called the prevention orientation. So basically, they spoke about safety, responsibility, security, and vigilance. Are you one of those?
First of all...
And I'm not putting you on a spot.
No, of course not. Of course not. He's taking a picture there. I think one thing I can certainly say, and that's true for most early stage investors I know, is at the time of investing in a company, people do not have a bias whether it's a male founder or a female founder. There is no bias because everyone is looking to make money, and you're saying, hey, if I find the 70 cents versus the 30 cents, I would do the 70 cents while both are bad. There isn't a bias. Now, the bias may be in the manner or behavior in which people handle those meetings, but when it comes to the investment decision making, I think it's the gender of the founder is definitely not a consideration. I can tell you based on maybe 15 odd female founder-led startups that we've invested in Sequoia, and one so far at A91 Partners. So that's definitely not a criteria. I would say the issue that we are really facing is promoting the hiring of talent into our industry and making sure that we go disproportionate at the entry level. What I mean by that is the talent pool that we consider for hiring across our businesses, which is in investing and portfolio companies, usually is that talent pool has between 15 and 20% women, which is if you look at the IIM graduating class and the good engineering colleges graduating class would have something like that, 20-25% women. And if you take the same proportion, you're probably not being fair to the gender. You have to do more. And
so how does one address that?
It's got to be a very conscious effort. So for example, when we started recruiting in Sequoia, when I became a senior partner in 2011, the first 3 associates we hired were all women. And Sakshi and Anjana that you spoke about early on in the session are folks from that vintage who are now principals, and they have to graduate to partners. And I think there's still a little bit of glass ceiling from a principal to a partner that has to be broken. And it's upon us, people who are more senior, have to provide the opportunity. Now, as we started A91, we started off as 3 individuals, now we are 11. Of 11, there are 5 women. Now, the 5 women hired, we've given a disproportionate importance to hiring women at the early stage. Now, it's our responsibility to make sure they succeed and take over the firm in 10 years from now. And it's not easy because there have been biases, there have been different reasons. But unless we do this, no one else is going to come and do this for us. So I think the real issue is in making sure that we are giving a little bit of support, whatever else is required to make sure they succeed. What we did was we told Sakshi and Anjana, go draft the policy for maternity leave and everything else related to that. And no one will edit it. You write what you want in that policy and we'll take care of that. It's signed off. They wrote it and they were happy and no one saw it. But that's a starting point. You need to do a lot more than that. But coming back to your question, on the basics of it, on investing, no one would distinguish saying, hey, I would be biased towards a male founder, because we're in the business of making money, and wherever you can make more money, you do that.
Interesting. Roshini, we heard all your male counterparts in the investing world. One said that I have no bias. The other said that I'm a product of a woman hiring me. The third said that we're looking at women entrepreneurs. I want to come to you, Roshini, that when you began your career to where you are now at Everstone, did you face any bias and be as open about it in a room full where it's kind of a world where it is like the boys' club of investing, and we know that, right? I mean, for a private equity industry like ours in India, kudos to the men who have actually signed on this charter, which Nupur has started. But there are also PE firms, which I don't want to name, we're all men, which have not signed on this. So it actually tells you a lot about the fact that there are some people who are not thinking about it the way it has to be thought. Perhaps it's not a mainstream issue for them yet. Now, from an Everstone Capital perspective, and I know that how the founders sort of want to think of it as an institution, I want to get some of your thoughts in this direction.
So I'm not a product of the industry. I'm a lateral hire. And I think I'm sitting here today because, one of my co-founders actually believed in me when he met me, right? And he said, even though I've never done a day of banking in my life, and I've actually come from consumer industry and a bulk of other industries, he said, I'm going to take you. In fact, I went in for the interview and he said, you don't need to, sit down and tell me who you are and what you've done. I've just decided to go forward. And I said, you need to listen to me to understand what I've done. And he said, no, I know you'll bring value to the firm. So I think you need people to take that call. So from an Everstone perspective, I think clearly, that's why that call was made. And when I really look at across PE, and I don't think I should be really, taking sides or saying what is right and wrong. Clearly, the industry, there are people who are, I think, at the forefront of the industry and really doing things for women. And there are funds and firms where it is a boys' club. I think it's a lot which is historical, right? And I've come from other industries where in the consumer world, global companies have made a very, very concerted effort. But it takes time. Nothing happens overnight, right? And for example, Unilever, which is one of the firms that I worked with, made this call around 20 years ago. Today, it is a fairly diverse firm, but it's 20 years of baby steps. And they went through a lot of errors, right? So there was a quota that was planned, which actually backfired. Then there was, overdoing for women, which again backfired. Then finally they decided, listen, everyone is equal. Let's just go on the basis of pure capability, and it's beginning to succeed. Will PE continue to have a challenge? I think it will because of the nature of the industry. In fact, I was talking to someone, one of the other women here, and I said, you know what? It's tough. The last 4.5 years or 5 years that I've been here, it's extremely tough. Not the business that you're in. That's great, that's interesting, but just in terms of the sheer travel that this industry demands out of you. Now, coming back to what Renuka said, you need women to turn back and tell other women, it's okay, your kids won't die. Your husband will still survive, right? Your family will not fall apart. It's taken a lot out of me in the last 5 years. I didn't sign up for it. When I got in, I said, okay, this is going to be different. I've done a lot of industry. Let me, there's someone who's really kind of believing in me. I will go all out. So I maybe just went all out, but it took a lot, right? And I was, I think, lucky that I had a very supportive husband and kids who just said, it's okay, Mom, we won't, we will not starve ourselves if you travel. But I think it's important to understand that this is a different industry. And therefore, it's not so much about, is this a boys' club? I think it's a lot about what do you do? How do you really help women? Or can you, and I've realized that, video conferencing doesn't help when you actually have to sit across with promoters who need you to dine with them and hang around with them and network with them and build their trust and keep going back to them. So I actually don't have a solution for it. But it'll be good for us to sit together and say, can women help other women? Can men help the women? Can women sit on video conferencing more and not be seen as not participative enough? So yes, I know it's a long answer, but I think it's a different industry.
Thank you, Roshini. I sort of now come to you now, Sanjeev. We heard from everybody. But tell me one thing, that you have worked across deals and across firms, and if you were to give an independent view, the boardroom dynamics or the deal dynamics, sort of how it changes, because I've had conversations with portfolio companies and startup entrepreneurs, and I remember this comment made by this so-called unicorn founder, and he said that, and he was talking about this large woman investor, and she said, when she enters the room, all the men, there's a bit of a exchange of glances. She is seen to be somebody who has a very strong opinion on things. How does the deal dynamics change some of these conversations also? And I think it's important to talk about some of these things, because while they're all talking about the good stuff, it's also important to talk about some of these things. And if you could give us some view on how it happens in the West, perhaps, how has private equity sort of plugged some of these gaps?
So I think I can I can talk about a couple of examples maybe. I think, and since you talked about the West, so let me talk about what we do in the US, for instance. I mean, in the US, for instance, Tim Ryan, who leads our business in the US, he has launched a CEO in Action program for diversity and inclusion. And he has got 148 CEOs in the US impaneled on that program, and they're completely committed to diversity and inclusion. Now, of course, it is much more broader, the whole D&I program that they're running, but gender is a significant part of it. So I think that's something that's happened in the US, and of course, we sort of support the UN program, he for she program as well in the West. And I think we can see, I mean, in the US, for instance, there was a point in time, I think it was about 5 years back, we had about 13% women partners. Today, we have 21% women partners in the US. We are sort of trying to get that. I think if we have only 6% in India, and so we are sort of trying to do some work. But I might just want to sort of add that one of the things that we did since it came up earlier, and something that we are absolutely proud of, is that we are actually part of what we call the Leadership Development Academy. And this is something that we have done with the Tata Sons, with the MX, with the PepsiCo, and with a couple of other firms. So 6 of us have got together. And what we do is that we actually, put our senior women leaders into this program and sort of help them sort of go through the curve. And let me tell you also that 4 of our partners at this point in time have actually been mentored by other people. I mean, they've been mentored by people, senior people from Emacs, from McKinsey and others. And I think that's really helped them. And I think that we can see them coming up the curve. And it's something that we see all the time. Now, I mean, to the point that you mentioned about the boardroom, I have to say that, in all my interactions with the independent directors in particular, I have always seen that whenever I've been in one of those discussions, I think the level, and again, I'm not trying to start any biases here, but I have to say that the level of questioning and the depth in which I've seen some of the women independent directors sort of take on the board is being really praiseworthy. And my experience is from the boardroom, and the women independent directors, to my mind, stand out.
Interesting. Sandeep, we just heard him. He said that women directors probe further. You have an answer for him?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, take the largest boardroom in the world and it can't accommodate more than 2 male egos, right? So we have to address that problem to begin with. So I would say that, more women in the boardroom is only going to ease that. We need that, and that's primarily because the way a woman problem solves is a woman scaffolds the problem, right? They figure out the basics, they figure out how to use scaffold and get to a solution. Men believe in power solutions, right? So we immediately jump to conclusions. We know what's the right answer. We want to drive everybody to it. And in many board meetings, I've seen how women negotiate a problem and get to a solution, bringing everybody on board versus men trying to power it through. And so having more women in the boardroom just adds to a different dynamic. And it is very different, and I don't know how to explain it. If I were to rely on an example, in Anita Dongre, for instance, the company used to be called And Designs. Right? And so in the boardroom, we were debating that we should change the brand or the name of the company because we wanted to create a umbrella brand under which we can promote and Global Desi and Anita Dongre and Grassroots. And so we wanted to come with an umbrella brand for the company. And we were trying to figure out how difficult is that journey going to be to change the entire identity of a company. Now, who can understand that better than a woman who goes through a change of identity when she gets married, right? So when you have a founder who is a woman who's gone through a change of identity, when you have the person who was leading the project of the name change is also a woman, it is just so much easier conversation versus if there were male founders trying to say we're going to change your whole identity. We have never experienced that. We don't know what to deal with, how it's gonna happen, and so the entire conversation just changes when you have women in the room because they are bringing a completely different perspective. Let's talk about consumer retail businesses. If you don't have a woman in your room when you're talking about half of the economy that's consumed by women, and if there are a bunch of men talking about apparel, household appliances, microfinance, beauty, you can't have a bunch of guys sitting around talking about beauty when there's no woman to give you the perspective. You're talking about IVF, mother and child care when it comes to the healthcare services business. Are you willing to cut off half of the economy and take decisions when you don't have that particular perspective? So you don't have to debate these things.
So
It is
nobody's
evident.
debating that, the entire need for this, but the entire argument that, we have to do something, I think the solution lies with private equity industry itself. Because, all said and done, as PE firms are becoming so large, and most of you are, right, in terms of AUM, it's almost like the comparison is made to conglomerates right now, right? You guys own businesses, which means that you have a major influence over companies that you partner with. That's the word you guys like to use, right? Partnership. So when there is partnership and alignment of interest, why can't there be a conscious effort and perhaps, the KPI or the metric with which you judge yourself in front of the LPs and the performance of the portfolio companies having more diversity?
No question, and we need to do more of that. And not only within private equity firms, we also need to do it with the portfolio companies. So what you're talking about, certain KPIs just talking on gender diversity, and it doesn't just stop with gender diversity, right? It needs to include all forms of diversity, is something that we need to put in place. Even within private equity firms, if you look, I think Lighthouse is a great example of where they've been able to really groom people at the bottom, but take them all the way to the top. And Mukund makes sure that every year and he's a good friend, every year when we have a conversation and I ask him how's Lighthouse doing, he ends the conversation saying, you cannot hire Rochelle. And so we need to do our own hard work to bring people up the ranks and make them be in positions where they can not only influence the private equity industry itself, but also all the portfolio companies that we invest.
I think I would like to sort of get on to you, Mukund, now, because the perils of having a boys' club, especially in startups, we have sort of seen this in a very big way. For instance, look at Uber, for example. What they did, the kind of sexist culture that they had has gone down in the history, saying that it is, the example of having a bad culture. So when you talk about some of these things, the problem is that the words like culture, diversity are often seen as non-mainstream. So in your organization, and I think Sandeep likes you so much that he spoke on your behalf, but do you have, when you speak to your portfolio companies in your boardroom conversations, how often does that come about?
No, I think culture is the intangible that you measure everything on. And let me draw a parallel. When I started investing about 20 years ago, I trained under a guy named Alan Washkowitz in New York. And he always compared growing a portfolio company to parenting, right? And if you judge your children purely on KPIs, you'll say, okay, my child came first rank, my child got this grade, that grade, in the sports competitions, that. He said, there's a whole other aspect to it, which is, are you raising kind children? Are you raising people that you can be proud of that will make the right decisions as they go out into the real world? Now, draw that for those of you who are parents, or maybe some of you are too young to have kids. As you raise your children, and Sandeep and our kids have grown up together, right? And I will tell you, my son Manas, his son Naman, one of the things we're proud of is our children are kind, right? And similarly, if you then take that to portfolio companies, yes, you want them to hit certain metrics. But you don't want, and Renuka made this point at the closed session, you don't want the metric to become a ceiling. It's like, oh, I've hit this number, let's move on. You want to back people who have the culture of actually embracing an organizational culture that promotes the things that are kind, whether it's to the environment, whether it is to diversity, because all of those things really matter. And coming to culture, I'll just point to one thing internally. So when we started Lighthouse, it was two of us that came from New York, my partner Sean, who I think many of you know, and myself. So we came from a more Western mindset. And I say that not to in any way speak ill of a local mindset, right? And our third partner, Sachin, who many of you know, came from a village in Bihar. And when we first met him, his English was pretty broken. I remember when Nupur came in to see us from IFC and talked to him. And you sort of think about, and I remember Sean and I having this conversation around, okay, how will the culture work? You know, will someone who grew up in this small town in a very traditional family, how will he think about these various aspects, including diversity, relative to the way we think about it? And so much of our call on Sachin, and I will tell you, you can't hire Sachin either, not he'll come, but best investor in town. But I will tell you that so much of his value to us is the values he shares with us. So that small town guy from Bihar believes as much about promoting the sort of the career and the success of Rochelle and Anshul and Nithya that are sitting here as we could have ever hoped. And if you don't have that in the organization, you'll never have success. So I think that's what we look for. Yeah, we can look for metrics, but whether it's at the firm, whether it's at our companies, we're constantly thinking about that. And I think as we look for companies, that's a big part of how we select entrepreneurs.
Interesting. Abhay, he spoke about, not necessarily KPIs, but think about culture in a more holistic way. You are building out your firm now. You just started with A91. Do you have any conversation with your LPs or internally when you or VT and Gautam, when you sort of speak about your investment decisions and mull over the next investment, does the diversity factor come in? That, okay, hey, we have this great chance of building a VC firm of repute, trying to make a difference, and perhaps let's commit a certain portion to startups founded by women. Is that a thinking or not at all?
First of all, I'm also from a small town in Bihar.
I'm also from that, yeah. You can't make generalizations
got myself into
like
a lot
that.
of trouble here. This cannot go in the press.
and till now, I thought I
And
was...
by the way, I remember Renuka's comment to me once. I went to interview her, and she was like, Shrija, she's asked me, and I was just told, like, I'm from Bihar. She was like, no wonder people from Bihar are very intelligent.
And one of my beliefs has now been broken. I was still now, at least I had the self-proclaimed title of the best investor from Bihar. Even that's gone. But on a serious note, in our firm, we have a lot of discussion on this. We have come from Sequoia, which was male-dominated for 45 years. And this was bashed up by the entire ecosystem for not thinking about this issue seriously at all. And when we entered Sequoia, this issue was kind of dismissed early on in a way, saying, hey, we are so successful, why bother? And that started changing around 2013-14, and the firm started saying, hey, it's important. And it's important because the firm had missed a few investments just because Pinterest is one example, and there were a few more where nobody could appreciate the investment because it was all male-dominated decision room. And therefore, our tenure at Sequoia was filled with a lot of introspection about why this is important and why we should emphasize on this topic a lot more. And so when we got a chance to restart, we said we'll give this a lot of importance, not just for internal hiring and culture and so on and so forth, but also as we think about each of the portfolio companies, when we invest in them, how do we think about making sure they are cognizant and taking steps in this direction? On your topic of saying, do we disproportionately bias our decision towards women? I would say that's probably not the intent. We get pushed a lot by Lizzie, for example, Gautam's wife, saying, hey, you should support. She's a woman founder who's well-funded now, and she keeps insisting you should. But we have so far said, hey, we can evaluate very independently all investment decisions that come towards us based on financial metrics and so on and so forth. So let's take that decision for now based on the business and the company. But after making the investment, let's make sure that we are very, very careful and focused on what we can do post the investment to make sure that this issue is taken care of. So for example, thinking about board members early on, hiring senior talent within the companies in critical functions who are women. So make sure that we are focusing a lot on these issues after the investment. But I mean, it's easy to say, yes, we do, but I don't think we have consciously thought about this, saying, hey, at the time of investment, do we bias ourselves towards this? Not yet.
So you don't have that thinking in that direction. But what really is the problem with that? You know, at the time when there's so much conversation around pushing the envelope on gender diversity, I want to come to you, Sanjeev. Is there really an inherent problem in saying that, okay, you know, X% of the trillion of assets that we have in the industry, about 8 trillion, and only 7% going to women-backed businesses? That's dismal. You know, I mean, it can't be like that. So when you have, and if climate change is glaring at us, so is diversity. Why can't we have this, the next percent earmarked to the industry? Do you think there's a problem there?
So, you know, again, you know, for us, you know, we do a great job at hiring women. You know, 33% of our new hires are women. Unfortunately, we sort of lose a lot of them at the mid-level. And I think we've been, you know, we've been doing some work on it. And I think one of the biggest things that we have found is that at the mid-level, there is lack of sponsorship. There is lack of empathy. And, you know, I think it was part of Nupur's presentation. At some level, some amount of unconscious bias. I think those things really, in our assessment, are the ones that we lose so many people at the middle, and that is why we possibly have only 6% partners in India, women partners. I think those are the three things that we have been focusing on in recent times, and I mentioned to you about the Leadership Development Academy that we have set up for women directors in the firm. There's a lot of focus on mentorship now, and you know, we want to make sure that a lot of people who come through the curve, you know, get to a level of manager or maybe even senior manager, etc. They stay with us. I have to say that within my deals business, you know, one of the main client set that they tell us that they really fear is the private equity client set, because they make them work really, really hard. But that's besides the point. Maybe you could be a little easier on our women employees, but that's just an ask. I mean, I cannot let that this occasion go. But yeah, I think seriously the point really is that I mean, if there is one thing that I have to call out, it is really a little bit more empathy and a little bit more sponsorship that those people need. And you see, I think some of our women partners are are actually the finest partners that we have.
Interesting. So he mentioned the word that there's lack of empathy and sponsorship. And I want to talk to you about Roshini, and you said, and you began your conversation saying that I'm here because there's somebody who backed me, right? Do we see that across the board, in the sense that when you are building out Everstone, is there a conscious decision to have more women coming up to take leadership positions?
You're asking about the firm or portfolio firm? Which one are you?
Both.
I think at the firm level, if I really look across, other than me, the head of investor relations is a woman. Globally, one of our heads of capital markets is a woman. So I think from an Everstone perspective, surprisingly, we've got women in senior positions. When I say surprisingly, I didn't expect it, right? And it's actually been quite interesting. However, and the head of HR is a woman for India. But I think at the recruitment level, I don't think we're, focused on getting more women, right? So if you really look at it, I think some of the women have happened, but I don't think we've really focused there. And it's an interesting point that you raised, saying at the firm level, how much are we looking at it? I think some more work needs to be done at the recruitment level, where we can really look and say, are we actively looking without necessarily creating a quota system at bringing in women? And once they come in, what we do see, and I think what you've said is absolutely right, retaining women becomes a challenge.
Interesting. So we spoke about various aspects here, and I want to come to the 3 male partners here, GPs. He made an interesting point. I heard from all of you that the women is the head of investor relations, the head of HR. And I was talking about private equity in this country. First of all, you could just possibly count the number of successful fund managers on your fingertips, right? And within that, those led by women, that fraction becomes much more narrower. Do any of you have women partners? Like Abhay, you don't have a women partner, right? And you're not even thinking in that direction. You're like, no.
No, I didn't say that. I said we have hired women, we have disproportionately hired women at this stage with a clear intent of making sure that over the next many years they take over the firm. So that cannot, I mean, you cannot immediately make them partners, but intent is very clear.
So Sandeep, the big fan of women here, if you wanted to contribute in that direction. You just began the conversation saying that I'm the product of a women hire.
Yeah, so at the firm definitely, but if you think about the India business, it's only about 10, 12 years old. And so as you scale, Indian private equity as a business itself is a very early business, right? So the industry is still settling down, people are still growing within the firm, and as people grow within the firm, there will definitely be women partners at the firm. I don't think you should ever categorize it that way. The best investors will rise to the top. I have no doubt that women are as good, if not better, investors because of the way they calibrate risk. And if you just take that as a metric, I'm pretty sure that's going to inadvertently happen. Also, if you think about, I wouldn't really push firms to say take more women, create more women partners, because the ones that won't will automatically fade away. Because performance will only be delivered when there's gender diversity, right?
I think we spoke about the financial incentive, having one woman on board. I want to hear from all of you one concluding remark or one key takeaway that all of you are consciously trying to do to push the envelope on diversity in terms of how you measure your portfolio companies, your conversations, something which you're actually doing and not the good stuff.
Okay, so we are just hiring 2 senior associates right now. And one of the key things that I have specifically told my team that's hiring is we need to see 50% of that applicant pool, if not more, being women. And I said, don't come to me unless you have that kind of a base, right? And so when the team hears that from you, automatically that causes a change in the mindset and the culture, saying this is what we need to do.
Of course, you guys have huge influence, right? PE as conglomerates, huge influence. Mukund, what are you doing? We're looking at him.
Nothing. No, I think it's really twofold, right? One is at a hiring level, I think there's always been a focus on ensuring there's no bias in the hiring process, and I think we've demonstrated that, right? And the fact that we have 2 very senior women on the investment team ensures that we continue that culture, because it's not just men hiring men. It doesn't continue to be a boys' club. I think that's point number 1. I think the second thing is in the next couple of years, sooner or later, you will see women in our partnership, right? I think when we reconvene for this, that's the question you should ask me.
That's your promise. Wow.
Okay. Unless someone on this dais decides to try to poach one of my... But...
This is coming to media. They're recording this.
But here's the question, right? I would like to see... Renuka, no. I'll say the same thing to you that I say to Sandeep.
No, but the
question...
By the way, Sandeep has established himself as a big fan of women here, yeah? He began his conversation...
And women have always been a fan of Sandeep. I've known Sandeep a long time. But here's my challenge to WinPE, and I said this to Nupur a couple of nights ago when we were chatting. I would like to see... Right now you have 3 senior investors, founders of firms, or heads of country, men sitting on this dais. Can we have a commitment that in a year's time or 2 years' time, it's not just Roshini, it's 5 women here?
Wow.
I think that's what you should gain. And that shouldn't be an artificial thing. It should be because the women are actually in those positions. Then this organization has succeeded.
Abhay, you have to really give a good answer because they have really, because you said that I have no bias, I'm not doing anything.
You have
just
to hold
said,
up the
no,
Bihari,
Shrija,
yeah.
I'm not doing anything percentage-wise in a portfolio, so you better give a good answer now.
No, very simply, 5 out of the 8 folks we've hired after starting the firm, and we started with 3 people, are women. And I'm not talking about support and so on. So that's step 1. But that's been done. It's more important that all of these women are provided serious mentorship and given a real chance to become successful investors over the next many years to become partners in the firm. So that's the focus. Make sure that they are mentored, tutored, given all the opportunities to become partners in the firm, and they should believe that. They shouldn't be looking out saying, hey, can I go somewhere else because this firm is not giving me the opportunity. And that responsibility lies with us. And that's a promise we've made to ourselves, saying this is something we will make happen. And if all three of us are aligned on doing this, then there's no reason why this should not be the case.
Roshini, concluding remark on how you sort of pushing the envelope in diversity.
So I'm actually, as one of the hats that I wear within the firm, is also recruiting for portfolio companies, especially at the CEO and the CXO level. And therefore, I think that's a commitment from me and from the firm also, because when I look at the CVs that come, automatically I'm biased more towards women. And I do see in the interviews that women perform a lot better than men, especially when a woman is sitting opposite, because they don't feel constrained, right? And some of our brightest CXOs in some of our portfolio firms are women. So that's something that we will continue, that I promise to continue to do.
Interesting. Sanjeev.
I think for us it is, whenever women take a sabbatical mid-career, I think for us the biggest thing is to get them back. I think to continue to stay engaged with them and to tell them that they have a career if they take a sabbatical, or in fact try for them not to take a sabbatical, and to work with them to sort of get them back in the firm. I think that's been our big focus. I think we're still getting that, but I think we're getting better.
Interesting. I know I'm sort of being shown stares and eyes and running out of time, but any panel discussion of mine cannot be complete without the rapid fire. Sandeep, don't stare at me. I'm going to come to you now. Okay, my rapid fire question to you is that, okay, if you were to tell me which is the smartest gender?
Women, no doubt.
Okay, a woman leader which you admire the most? Did he just say that because she's in front of you? I'm 110% sure you're negotiating a deal with her. She's on the other side. Is that the case?
When I have a problem on the domestic front, it's my wife. And on the work front, I just put Zia in front of whatever the problem is.
Okay, Mukund, I have a question for you. If this world were a billboard, what would you write on that?
Wow. How come he gets the easy question? If the world were a billboard. Wow. If the world were a billboard, what would I write on it? Oh my God.
Abhay, maybe you can answer. Root for the Biharis here. Yeah, Roshini, yeah. Go for it, go for it.
He said, wow, women always win. That's what it is.
You said it already.
It's not about the numbers.
It's not about the numbers. Okay. Roshini, the same question for you.
We're all alive because of women.
Wow. And Abhay, my question to you is that, suppose you're stuck in an elevator with this famous woman that you admire the most. You know, how would you sort of break the ice with her? Like maybe you could be like intimidated by her or something like, I don't know. It says sands the ceiling.
This would be my expression if I was stuck with her. No, speechless. No.
Okay, you're like,
Abhay, you reached the ground floor. Done.
Sanjeev, my last question to you really is that, you know, we have spoken about a lot of, you know, very successful male fund managers, right? And the names to the counts. 5 years from now, of course, there's Renuka and the other women. If you were to name like 5 women fund managers, you know, coming from India, whom you think getting up there, whom would those be? And I'm not putting you on a spot here.
No, absolutely not. I think everybody who's in the room and who's not in the room, I would really hope and pray that all of them aspire to be amongst the top 5 and more. And let me just say this, since I saw Shivani in the room. I mean, when I made partner at PwC, she gave me my first engagement It was some infrastructure engagement. I don't remember which one it was, but she was so my first job as a PwC partner was for her. So I think everybody in the room and outside, I think power to them, and I'm sure we will find more than 5. So if you do a ranking, a few years from now, I'm sure you'll find a women partner as one of the bigger ones.
So I'm looking forward to that. On a more serious note, I just want to say this, that when the Uber debacle happened, Netflix, one of the most influential companies in the world, came up with what was the culture document. And it was a world-class culture document where they said that having more boys or having more men on our portfolio companies or on the company that we are into sort of actually gets them or creates more nuisance for them. So basically the maxim was that, we don't want to hire jerks, is what they said. I would see and like to see with what Nupur is doing with WinPE that we come up with a fantastic culture document of our own, which becomes a preamble not only for the PE industry, but for the financial services industry at large. And with that, can we have a round of applause for this panel for being so candid with us? And really, nobody asked me this question, but I was at a fellowship, a few months back, and I was watching this amazing play called Mamma Mia with a PE investor. And that time I thought for myself that if I were to do a women private equity fund, which I want to do, I would actually name it Mamma Mia. I had told this to Nupur. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Renuka and Nupur, for having me. Thank you.